All right, good morning, everybody. I'm going to kick this off because we've got a really packed agenda today and I want to keep us down to half an hour. I'm going to start by, I think anyone who has been around for a few of our webinars, or at least was around the last one, will recall that we kicked off last time with a complaint about the weather. How naive we were back then. I think it's safe to say that we've found more interesting things to complain about in the intervening time, but there we go. This is, of course, the HAPI FHIR and Smile CDR release webinar for May 2020. Codename for this particular release is Labrador. And as it happens, I have a Labrador sitting right next to me as I do this, which is kind of fun. This is HAPI FHIR 5.0.0 and Smile CDR 2020.05 R01, the special pandemic edition of our release webinar. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's new in HAPI today, a little bit about what's new in Smile, give you guys a sense of what we're planning on working on for the next quarter. And of course, as a reminder or as an introduction to anyone who hasn't been for one of these things before, we do releases every quarter, every 3 months, in other words. So this is the May release. We'll be back in August with our next release. And we, as always, are recording this webinar and we'll make a recording of this available afterwards. So if you've got colleagues that weren't able to be here today, not to worry. It usually takes us a couple of days to get the video edited and up on YouTube and all that fun stuff, but we will have this posted within a couple of days. The release, however, is live. We've been really organized this time around, which is awesome. Usually it's a mad scramble on the day of. We actually pushed our binaries up to Maven for HAPI and to our distribution servers for Smile. We did that over 24 hours ago, which is awesome. I think we have almost set a new record for being organized on a release, which is great. So we always start with a photo. Last time it was our snowy balcony. I thought, why not? I feel like this is probably a scene that will be familiar to lots and lots of people watching this. We're all getting pretty used to doing Zoom meetings and other Zoom equivalents and all of that. This is the Smile CDR Friday social last week, where we try and get together. This is the team that brings you HAPI FHIR and Smile CDR. So I don't know, we're all happy to meet you. And I think a bunch of us are on the call. I'm going to put this up again at the end so that people can try and find themselves and you can look for your favorite developer on there. So let's start with HAPI. This is our 36th release, which is crazy to me. We haven't actually counted them before. I counted them this morning just to put that up on the slide. I had no idea we'd had 36 of them. That's a heck of a track record. We also hit an interesting milestone over the last quarter. We have passed 100 code contributors on GitHub. What that means is 104 people as of yesterday have contributed source code, have actually submitted pull requests to the HAPI FHIR project. I think this speaks really well to the breadth of the community that has formed around the project and the sort of the great big tent that we have formed. So I'm super excited about that. I think it's a really neat thing, and that number doesn't even include all of the people who have written us with ideas, have filed bug reports, all of that. It's a great big community, so that is just awesome. I will give one shout out once again to the HAPI FHIR Atlas. If your company or your project or whatever it is you're doing with HAPI is not on our Atlas, I mean, of course, it's fine if you don't want it to be, but if you'd like it to be, we would love to have you. There are instructions on the website for getting that up. You can send us a note, fill a form out, even submit a pull request to get your project up there. We've tried to make it nice and easy. So what's new? Let's talk about some of the new stuff in HAPI to start with. The biggest feature, and I will start here, is a feature called Partitioning and Multitenancy. This feature started out as a simple desire to add traditional multitenancy, which of course is A security feature allows you to segregate data so that one user can't see another user's data. That feature has blossomed into something much bigger, actually, which we're calling partitioning, actually. And multi-tenancy is actually just one use case of many that you could implement with the partitioning feature. We're envisioning this as a mechanism for basically dividing your resources in your JPA server into logical buckets. And you can do this for security reasons if you want. That's multi-tenancy. But you can also do it for all kinds of other reasons. We're envisioning people creating pools of resources broken up by source system or by functional need or by expiry policy. There's all kinds of ways you might stripe your data depending on what type of system you're building. And we've sort of envisioned this feature as being great for all of those. We really, at this point, we've tried to design it to be so flexible that we really have no idea what people are going to do with it. So we're kind of excited to see what else people come up with in terms of good use cases for the multi-tenancy feature. I will point you to documentation if you're a HAPI FHIR user. That's where you'll find documentation. If you're a Smile CDR user, the second link is there. I do want to draw your attention if you are building multi-tenant servers. There are some limitations. None of them I think are deal breakers, but there are a few things that I don't know, limitations in the design that we're intending to work through. So I do want to highlight that third link as something you should read as you're planning out implementations with this new and exciting feature. A big breaking change in the API of HAPI FHIR. And this is one of the major reasons we've decided to go with a new major release. We of course use the Semver versioning scheme. And this is the first in the 5 series of HAPI releases. One of the big reasons we did that is that we have completely reworked an interface called the iValidation support interface. If you've never dealt with that, and probably many people haven't, you probably don't realize that it's a really critical piece of infrastructure that underpins things like validation and terminology operations, structure definition, snapshot generation. A bunch of key FHIR features are all powered by that interface. The interface, as these things tend to do, grew organically over time and had really become a bit of an unmaintainable mess. So we thought about reworking it and then just decided let's completely rewrite it. So that was, despite being not particularly user visible, was a huge project to redesign that thing. And will pay dividends, I think, over time. What this means is it all of a sudden becomes really easy to add, for example, new sources of profile material, new terminology validators. So if you've got your own grammar-based terminology set, your own code system, you can write a validator for it and plug it into the rest of the ecosystem really easily. We've almost proven that out by adding a bunch of new support for different grammar-based code systems, which would have been really hard to do in the old system. But as soon as the new system came along, it was easy, so we did it. We've now got full validation support for UCOM, the Unified Codes of Units and Measures, the USPS state code system, and BCP 47, the languages code system. Which is all awesome stuff. Now that we've got that underway, there's new stuff we can do with this new validation API. We've got a few things planned for the next quarter, including beefing up support for external terminology services. We have this lovely dream of being able to mirror and marry HAPI FHIR data server with, for example, an Onto server terminology server, because what a great combination that is. And that's all possible with these new APIs. And of course, the biggest driver for all of this really was getting ready for support for NPM-based package management. If anyone is not aware, FHIR is moving very aggressively towards adopting the NPM. It's not actually a standard, but the NPM specification for package management for FHIR packages. This is not for JavaScript code, which is the primary use case for NPM, but for another sort of related packaging thing, which is validation resources and their dependencies, which is a tricky problem. And NPM is actually a fairly elegant solution to that problem. So we've been preparing ourselves for that. The NPM support is not in HAPI 5, but I do expect it to land in HAPI 5.1. Another sort of big thing, and this is important, especially to anyone who will be at the FHIR Connectathon, which also kicks off later on today. The R5 definitions, which are of course draft, they're not final yet, but we have updated to the latest FHIR R5 definitions. This is what's called Preview 2 or FHIR 4.2.0, and it makes me happy that HAPI is no longer on a version which is almost exactly the same as the FHIR version, because that creates a weird correlation that doesn't actually exist. I will point out to anyone who is working with subscriptions, there's loads of changes to the subscription resources. There's lots of changes to other things as well, but subscriptions are the ones that I find the most interesting, so I like to highlight them. They are really good, actually. Subscriptions are going in a really neat place in FHIR R5, but they are breaking changes, so people need to be aware of that. Chained positional searches is a little feature that didn't work quite right in the last release of HAPI. We had added a bunch of support for location-based searching, and that has been more or less finished as of HAPI FHIR 5. This does allow you to do some really neat things. I've got an example up on the screen, which I think highlights the power of this feature. This idea that if I wanted to do, look for any practitioner roles that are near a specific location within a specific distance, you can kind of imagine there are so many people, and I'm going to talk about this more later, building, for example, pandemic response apps right now. The ability to do these situational queries, I can see that as being really useful in that kind of space. So I think that's kind of a neat feature to point out. There we go. One other change that is in a way a bit of a breaking change, although I don't expect it to be user visible to anyone, is we have completely reworked the way that we do date searching in the JPA server. Previously, everything was, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good way of explaining this in a non-complex way, but we used to assume a bunch of precision in dates, even if that precision wasn't there. And that led to some weird false negatives. If you had a baby that was born in the morning of the 11th in Australia, they might show up in a search for anyone born in the 10th if the server was in Canada, for example, because of the time zone differences, which makes sense to the computer because those are the same times, but doesn't make sense to the human because really what you care about is the local date. So we have corrected that now, and completely time zone independent date searches will provide the exact results that a human would expect them to return, which is great. That has been a long time coming and was more complicated to solve than you might actually think. Another little feature that's been added, this is an extension in the HAPI server. This is not a part of the FHIR spec, but it's something we thought would be useful. This is a thing called the FHIRPath Filter. And anyone who's ever tried to design a custom search parameter will probably love this feature, because writing your FHIRPath expressions can be tricky as you're trying to figure out, how do I dig down into the exact point in the resource I know I want to index. It is now possible for any search or read or history, basically any sort of FHIR operation you perform, to have an arbitrary FHIRPath expression executed over top of the result you would have seen and get that result back. I've got one example here, or lots more in our documentation, but this is a pretty cool thing. And this is, of course, available for your servers as well. This is done by an interceptor, so you can add this exact feature to your own servers if this is something you'd like to see as well. An under the cover feature that's gone into HAPI that is actually a huge deal, even though it's again, kind of non-user visible, is we have completely wholesale moved away from the Google JSON JSON parser over to another library called Jackson. Jackson is, I don't know, it's a great parser. It brings a bunch of improvements to us. It's infinitely more flexible compared to JSON, which is really nice. And it brings a couple of key improvements, notably a small improvement in speed. It's not major, about 5%, sometimes 10%. So, not huge, but important nonetheless. But more importantly, as it parses, it keeps track of line numbers, which was a glaring omission in JSON. If we ever had parse errors, we weren't able to actually report on what line the error was in, which always drove me nuts. Jackson does have that feature, so we've got much better ability to report on error line numbers, which of course is great as you're developing. The other thing I love about it is the pretty printing format it uses is much more compact and actually quite configurable too, which is nice. I've got an example on the screen there. That example is 13 lines long now. That exact same pretty printed serialization was about 20 with JSON, so it's a lot nicer to look at this way. I do want to give a huge shout out to Bogdan Solga, who contributed most of the work to this feature as a pull request that came straight out of the community. So thank you very much, Bogdan. As always, we are constantly obsessing over performance and doing optimizations and doing profiling and figuring out where we can squeeze more performance out of the server. A bunch of fixes have gone in over the last quarter, which also will sort of help depending on what use cases you've got. History operations take way fewer database round trips now than they used to, even as of the last release. So especially if you're trying to operate history over a large pool of data, for example, using the history operation to capture a complete change set for lots of resources, you'll get way better speed and way less database IOPS than you used to doing that operation. A foreign key constraint in the database was removed that we realized was redundant and was really slowing down expunge performance, sometimes causing it to stall entirely. That's all been cleaned up, so the expunge operation works a whole lot faster now than it used to. And I guess the other one I do want to mention is because this is dramatic how good this how much of an improvement this can make. We did a bunch of profiling over transaction processing, specifically focusing on loading Cynthia data in, which we know is a very common use case. And in some cases, we've seen like a 200% improvement of throughput for transaction processing of really large bundles like the ones generated by Cynthia. So if one of your use cases is importing large data sets, that is a huge reason to try and move to HAPI FHIR 5. One thing I will point out, we've added a new mode called delete disable mode, which basically turns off the ability to delete resources in the server. The reason I draw attention to this is with deletes disabled, we can actually do away with a bunch of checks for, is this resource deleted? For example, if someone's trying to link to that resource in a new resource, and bring in a bunch of caching for things like ID mappings and things like that. So you'll actually get a whole bunch of a nice performance boost actually if you disable deletes on the server. So a common sort of usage pattern we're recommending now is if you're doing bulk loads of data, turn off deletes for a bit, do your bulk load, maybe turn them back on after that if you need it. One final thing in the HAPI world that is worth drawing attention to, we introduced, it was either last release or the one before, I think it was the one before, support for what we call externalized binaries, which basically means if you've got large binary blobs, we move them out of the relational database storage and into, for example, file system storage or S3 buckets or whatever, so they can be stored in a more efficient way. That feature was implemented a while back, but never worked for, like it was always excluded from support for the bulk export feature. If you're doing FHIR bulk exports, which do involve creating large blobs of binary data, that will now take advantage of externalized binary mode, which means that you'll be much nicer to your relational database if you do those things. Let's see what else. So, finally, so we've made a bunch of improvements to the ability to do chained searches. I've sort of outlined those here. I don't want to go through all of the details here, but there are a couple of really nice new features. These are things that were, I don't know, corner cases in the FHIR spec, basically, that we had not supported before and have gone through and added support for now. So a bunch of new support for fancy FHIR features in HAPI FHIR now. And there we go. So I'm going to change gears now and talk a little bit about Smile CDR and what's new in that product. This is our 14th release of Smile CDR, which is also a pretty crazy number. It kind of amazes me that we've been doing this for long enough that we're up to 14 releases, but there you go. Smile CDR 2020-05 is based on HAPI FHIR 5. So all of the features I've already spoken about are included in the current release of Smile CDR, and then some. So what are those and then some? First off, I definitely have to mention the partitioning and multitenancy feature once more. It is, of course, all present inside HAPI FHIR, but really what makes it sing is if you bring this into the world of Smile CDR, with all of Smile's security infrastructure, its permission system, its OIDC support and all of that. That's where partitioning really becomes interesting, just because all of a sudden you can flip a switch and you've got a fully multi-tenant server that is taking advantage of the permissioning system and the app scopes and all of that good stuff. So all of this stuff fits together really, really well, and it's actually fairly trivial to turn on. So we've put a bunch of work into making the experience of getting this all set up in Smile CDR to be a good one. We're hoping people will find that it actually is. Oops, why are we not moving? There we go. We have put tons of work over the last quarter into the MongoDB repository as well. We're seeing lots of interest from people looking to adopt MongoDB as a storage engine for FHIR resources. Among other things, we now support chained searches, which was not supported previously. We now support subscriptions, which were not available in the last release with Mongo. Date searches were an odd omission actually, but they were not supported before. Custom search parameters are now there, and we do have the ability now, which was supposed to be present in the last release but didn't work, the ability for you to pull credentials for your MongoDB instance out of a credential vault, such as Conjure or HashiCorp. That, of course, incidentally, is available already for relational databases and any other credentials that are stored in Smile CDR. It was supposed to be available for MongoDB, but was not. And it seems like it is a fairly common pattern out there for people to have MongoDB and a credential vault. So we have got that all working together now, which is nice. One little breaking change I will draw people's attention to. If you are using subscriptions with Smile CDR, naturally you will be backed by either ActiveMQ or Kafka as your messaging engine that powers the subscription engine. We have changed the channel names a little bit, and that of course means the ActiveMQ queue names or the topic names in Kafka. That change was sort of a necessary evil in order to help us with a bunch of planned enhancements we have for the next quarter. So it is what it is. If you're upgrading an environment and you have no subscriptions in flight, that means nothing queued up for delivery. This is not even going to affect you. If you do have data queued up for delivery, there are ways of making this a painless change. So do get in touch, and we're happy to help you work through that. Another interesting feature that's gone into Smile CDR is the Elastic APM. So Elastic APM, or Elasticsearch Application Performance Monitoring System, if you haven't played with this before, is a really nice stack for adding application monitoring and metrics and tracking to an application. We have added a whole bunch of native hooks into Smile CDR so that the experience of marrying these two technologies is a good one. It is just amazing the types of dashboards you get with almost the flick of a switch by hooking up an APM server to Smile CDR. We have got demos of this ready to go, so if anyone would like to see a demo, I certainly don't have time for it here, but we are always happy to give demos of how that all works. And it is, to anyone who is in the DevOps space, it is really cool to see, actually. This is kind of a funny little feature that has been heavily requested and has been missing for ages. And that is, it's possible, of course, when you spin up a new environment to set up almost all of your configuration via properties files, which means you can basically have an environment come up with all of your configuration ready to go. You can check that configuration into source control if you want. There were a couple of glaring omissions that could not be done that way and had to be done through manual user action. And those have all been now corrected. So it's now possible via configuration to precede a collection of users if you need, to precede a collection of client definitions for OpenID Connect or Smart, and to precede a collection of server definitions for OpenID Connect and Smart. So that will be useful to people who are trying to sort of create replicable environments or move configuration from one environment to another. Rate performance, as always, has seen a great deal of improvement. I've got a couple of numbers here, and we've got some benchmarks we're working on as well. We have seen up to 200%, and this is very legitimate, actually. Improvement in performance when doing sort of large imports of data using generally transaction bundles that have thousands of resources in them. So we're really happy about this. I almost couldn't believe my eyes when I saw what results we got out of our last round of profiling exercises. So if you are in a performance sensitive environment, I would highly recommend getting up to the latest release. This is one of the best reasons for it. A couple of miscellaneous features, mostly to do with little glitches that have all been corrected. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about these, but we've put a bunch of work into that. I'm going to close by talking about what we're up to over the next quarter. And I was thinking about this, it's kind of interesting in terms of what we're doing in the next release. We had I talked about a few things in the last release webinar and saying they were scheduled for this quarter. And as it turned out, I'm going to talk about them again today, which I think is kind of neat. First, I was pessimistic because it meant that I was talking about things 2 releases in a row that we still hadn't finished. But I realized we're doing such big projects now with such huge improvements to the system that they actually just take longer than a quarter to complete, which is neat. I think it's exciting that we're getting to the point where we're doing such large projects for development fairly regularly. These are big improvements to the system. I am going to draw your attention. We have a point release planned already. We have a fix that literally was completed last night and has not even gone into code review yet. So it'll be a few days still before we can get this into a tested point release. But it's important enough that we do feel like it'll affect a bunch of people and is worth releasing as soon as it's ready, rather than waiting 3 months for the next major release. This is a feature, a performance fix to do with people who are doing chained searches with multiple chains on the same search. Not too many people, I think, are in that situation, but enough are that I think this would be a useful performance fix for that. We will provide details on whether you need to upgrade to this or not in the release notes when this is ready. We continue our work on the Slastn operation. This is thanks to a great partnership we've got with some friends at the NIH. The Slastn, of course, is a great way of producing lists of observations that are, for building things like flow sheets. This is all built on Elasticsearch, and we have managed to squeeze some really amazing performance out of Elasticsearch for implementing this operation. It's to the point where we're now starting to think, do we want to drop support entirely for the Hibernate search library and its implementation of Lucene and just move to native Elasticsearch integration? This is an active consideration. I don't think it's a decided thing yet, but it is something we're thinking about. Our EMPI, which I talked about last time, is going to be merging. We're going to have our first MVP merge probably in the next week or so, which means that the EMPI in HAPI FHIR and Smile CDR will become available for testing in about a week's time, which is really exciting. Doesn't mean it's finished yet, but does mean it's to the point where we're welcoming outside help in testing it. If anyone out there is interested in testing the EMPI, this is a great time to get in touch and let us know if you're interested in helping. We are going to be kicking off a project probably in June, in June, actually. What am I talking about? To start implementing native robust CQL support to HAPI and Smile, which we're very excited about. This is thanks to a partnership with IntraHealth and our friends at Digital Square. We're really excited about this. CQL, the clinical quality language, is a really neat query mechanism for running things like quality metrics, clinical guidelines, that type of thing on top of FHIR repositories. So more to come on this for sure. I don't know all the details myself quite yet, but we've got lots of CQL work planned over the next quarter, which is going to be great. Another interesting one, and this is thanks to a partnership with our friends at Loink. We are planning on adding support for versioning to code systems to the terminology services built into HAPI FHIR. What this means, of course, is today in a HAPI FHIR terminology server, you can only have one version of a code system like Loink or SNOMED-CT or anything else. We will have the ability for you to upload multiple versions and perform version-specific expansions and validations and things like that, thanks to this set of improvements. We are very excited for that because we know this is a common need of people who are doing terminology things. Drawing to a close, I want to draw your attention to two projects going on in the wide world to do with the current pandemic situation. I know lots of people out there, it's not like us developers have ample time on our hands. We're all pretty busy these days. But if you're looking for a project to dig your nails into to help the world with the current pandemic situation, here's two places you might think about starting. First off, Fireball, which is the FHIR Business Alliance, of which Smile CDR is a founding member, has kicked off what we're calling the Fireball COVID-19 Response Project. We are looking to build tools that will help with things like symptom tracking, reporting, that type of thing. We are always looking for people to provide help, and that help could be development, it could be UI, UX research, it could be, clinical input. It could be anything else. If you have got any kind of interest in this, this domain, we would love for you to help us out. If you hit the URL fireball.org, there is a link on there to this specific project and instructions on how to get involved with that. We would absolutely love to hear from you. So please don't hold back there. One other project that we are involved with, although it's not our project, but I think it's a really cool project and well worth highlighting. SANER, which stands for Situational Awareness for Novel Epidemic Response, is an attempt to build a FHIR implementation guide, which is effectively, a data model for pandemic data exchange. And the target here is not just the current COVID-19 situation, but future pandemics as well, making sure we're ready with data models and exchange APIs and things to exchange data on availability of resources and assets and all kinds of other things that are interesting. SANER also has probably my favorite logo outside of our own, which is the cute little fireball, which is punching out a COVID virus. I think that's kind of cute. I said to them that I wanted to get that on a t-shirt, and I will follow through with that threat one of these days. The link to that project is up on the screen as well. And there are lots of ways of getting involved with that project as well. And of course, highly recommended to do so if that's an area you think you might be able to help. So there we go. Thank you everyone for listening. There's lots of stuff I haven't covered. I've already gone over time, which I knew I was going to do, and there we go. Still didn't have time to talk about everything that's new because we've really packed a lot into the 5 release. So thank you all. Everybody stay safe. Check out the change logs to see what else has changed in there. And there we go. And with that, I'm going to leave us with the happy hour. Thank you very much, everybody.